Hey everyone, it's time for another episode of the New Stack Makers. And today I have a guest who has been on the show several times, one of our favorites in this world, Cheryl Hung, Vice President of Ecosystems at the CNCF. Cheryl, it's great to have you here today.
Hey, Alex, I love being on the New Stack, so it's awesome to be back here again. And yeah, thank you for being the first to drop the fact that I have been newly promoted to VP Ecosystem.
It's really neat to see that. You've done such great work there. I was saying so beforehand that this end user community is so important, and we just love talking to the people who are using the technologies because we get plenty of opportunities to talk to the vendors. And the technology radar that you're going to be presenting today is really the work that you've been doing with that end user community to get some feedback about the tools. The technology radar is based upon ThoughtWorks and the technology radar that they've done over the years, but you've taken it to a next step and you're going to show us what this technology, what this technology radar is all about. So why don't you take it away and just show us what you've developed?
I actually really appreciate you starting with that introduction, because one of my goals with this project is to show reality. Obviously, we're all really interested in the new projects and the new tools and the new products that are coming out. But the question is always, is anyone actually using this? Is it real, or is it hype that's going to fade away in a few months or a few years? So that was really my motivation behind this new report, the CNCF Technology Radar. So just a little introduction for myself. I'm previously an engineer at Google. I've been thinking in containers and cloud native since 2010, so about a decade now, since Google's Borg inspired Kubernetes. I've also been very involved with the community. I run the Cloud Native London meetup. And you can find me on Twitter at @OyCheryl, and I would love to get in touch and hear your feedback about this. And my mission at CNCF is to really help these end users be successful and be productive as they're adopting cloud native technologies. So what I mean by the end users is really this group of companies. So this is a group of about 145 companies. So you can see some of them are very big, some of them are very small startups. They're from all over the world. They're from all different industries. There's finance, media, retail, many, many more. And all of these companies are really motivated to adopt cloud native and Kubernetes technologies. So the interesting thing about working with this group of companies is that they quite often can't talk about what they're doing publicly. Like they need legal and PR approval. So within this group of companies, they can actually talk a lot amongst themselves and have a lot of great discussion. But a lot of that stays within this group. So another part of CNCF, the Technology Radar, is for me to take some of these discussions that I've been hearing over the last couple of years and surface those out in a more aggregated and anonymized way so that people can really hear, what are the challenges that end users face, what projects and tools do they use, and what would they recommend to other people who are on their journey towards cloud native.
I have a quick question for you. What is on the minds of people today? I mean, you're at home, I'm at home, everyone is at home. Travel is quite restricted due to COVID-19. What is on their minds these days?
If you go by my Twitter feed, I think sourdough seems to be a big deal.
Yes.
But I think people, it's actually been a good moment for people to reset a little bit and think about what's genuinely important. What are we doing just because that's the way things have always been done, versus once we emerge out of COVID-19, like, what's the future going to be? What do we actually want our vision to be in a year or a couple of years' time? And that applies as much to technology as it does to, you know, how do we build the societies that we want or the economy that we want. So I think it's a very, very interesting time for everyone to sort of reset their thinking. I mean, just like you and me, like here we are talking on virtual meetings in a way that previously we always met in person, right?
Right.
We were always at events together. So it's definitely been a big change for everybody. This is kind of a summary of what I just said. So the goals behind this tech radar is to share what things are actually being used, what things do they recommend, and look at some of the patterns across these 145 companies. And then I also think this is really key, that we highlight that this is the real world usage. That includes proprietary technology, it includes non-CNCF projects. But even though I work at CNCF, you know, the world is not entirely CNCF things. So we need to see what end users really see. So today I'm going to talk about the format a little bit for people who maybe aren't familiar with the ThoughtWorks Radar, the original format. Talk about the methodology behind how we built it, and then I'm going to show you the results for the first one, which was around continuous delivery. Let's start with just understanding how to read a technology radar. So this is the original radar from ThoughtWorks. In fact, they publish this on a yearly basis. So this is their most recent 2020 version. And their technology radar, the key concept behind it is that things in the middle are more mature, more stable, more widely adopted. And then as you go further and further out, it becomes less and less so. So more experimental, or maybe things are fading away as other things come on to replace them. So in this case, you can see that the ThoughtWorks radar has about 100 items on it, and it's divided into quadrants. So some of these are techniques, like what do we have? Infrastructure as code, there's tools, there's platforms, and then languages and frameworks. So if we look into maybe the platforms quadrant, since we're in platforms here, you can see that Adopt, they consider .NET Core and Istio to be the most mature and stable and ready to adopt. Then in trial, there's about 10 items, 10 projects. Argo CD, for example, is a CNCF project. And then again, in the assess, as you go further out, there's a bunch of other projects. And then the outermost ring here is called hold. So hold means we recommend that you stop doing this or you start moving away and doing something else. So in this case, they've put something called node overload into this hold segment. So that's kind of the inspiration behind it. We've changed it and sort of simplified the format a little bit. So I'm going to talk a bit about how the CNCF technology radar is different from this ThoughtWorks radar. Before I do so, let me just clarify the exact definitions of these. So Adopt, the one closest in the center, says we can clearly recommend it. It's been useful across lots of different use cases, across different teams. Trial means we've used it, we've tried it, and we think we've had some success with it. Assess is we've tried it out and we think it's promising. So if you're looking for a particular tool or technology, you should consider these items. And then the last one is hold. So it doesn't mean it's bad. It doesn't mean that you should definitely not use it. It just means there might be better options out there, or you might want to look at the ones in here alongside with some of the other, or after these other projects. So it's kind of a way to help you prioritize if you have a list of so many different technologies, is definitely true in cloud native. You know how fast things change, new things come out all the time. So this kind of helps you prioritize by seeing what are people using and adopting first.
So is it relevant that you've chosen these 4 category names? Why those names? Adopt, trial, assess, hold.
I totally stole these from ThoughtWorks.
Okay.
So ThoughtWorks decided on these original names, and I've just borrowed them in classic open source fashion. So let's talk about some of the differences between the CNCF Technology Radar versus the original version. So the most important one is that the CNCF Technology Radar is community driven. So instead of being the opinion of a single company or a single organization, instead the idea is to look across that group of 145 companies and see the trends among those end users. So the data comes from there, and the community representatives actually decide what this radar will look like. The second change is that I wanted to focus this as a really forward-thinking way, so I only decided to keep 3 rings out of this. So assess, trial, and adopt, and we dropped the hold ring, which also simplifies it a little bit. One of the things that I actually don't particularly like about this is that this definition is very different from these 3 definitions. So I don't think it's clear if you look at this that this 4th ring means something quite different to the middle 3. So on a personal level as well, I just wanted to avoid that confusion.
Is that an effort to balance the issues that might come up with the vendors? Because I would think that if you're in that hold part of the ring, if you're in that 4th ring, you may be a little bit concerned about that.
Right. I think it's a bit unfair as well, because just because something is in hold doesn't mean that it won't change in the future. Whereas someone who's reading it might read it as this is just bad. And that was never the intended sort of way to read it. But for the sake of both the readers and the vendors, I think it's best to avoid that confusion.
But when you're looking at the data and you're looking at what the vendors say, there will be companies that will fit into that 4th category. Have they at all been providing you feedback? Have they been critical of this approach?
So far, actually, no. So I haven't had a company say like, "Oh, we think that, we should be higher or we should be lower." And part of what I'm going to show you with the methodology is we want this to be backed by data. We want this to be backed by who is actually using it and what does the end user community say, rather than it being, because I feel this should be higher, therefore I'll put it higher, or because I don't like this project, I would put it lower. So I think that I've not actually had any of the companies come back to me and say like, we vehemently disagree with this and we hate the idea. I think people, once they see the data behind it, understand why it's been chosen this way. Another big change is that in classic kind of continuous delivery style, instead of doing 100 items per year, we want to target doing 10 to 20 items per quarter. And they would be on a specific use case. For example, the first one is continuous delivery, but could be serverless, could be storage, could be something else. And again, this is just to simplify it and make it easier to read, because 100 items is a lot. And if you only update things once a year, it's just not fast enough within cloud native. Things change really, really fast. So the target is once per quarter. Okay, so let me look over this methodology now. So the first thing that I did was to create, this is a Google spreadsheet, and I listed a bunch of continuous delivery tools down the left-hand side. And I asked every company within the end user community to add a column for themselves and just select one of these options for what their own company recommends or doesn't recommend for these different tools. So this is the same as we saw before: adopt, trial, assess, and hold. And I also said if you have ones that are not listed here, you can add your own. So it's not a preset list of options. They could add more. And then I also invited them to add in comments if they wanted to say, here's why we chose to put this tool in this category.
How do you take into consideration how long the two tools have been in the market? Because there may be some brand new tools in the market. Is it like purely based on what the customer end user has said? So if they're not mentioning a brand new tool, then you don't have it on your list.
Precisely, yeah. So this is very much a snapshot in time, which is why the radar is tied to June of 2020. This data was collected in May, so about a month before. But if we did this exercise again in a year or 2 years, we would definitely see a different set of results. And I think that's correct, right? Because it would look different at that time. But definitely there's no attempt to weight it by, how well it's known or how long it's been in the market or anything like that. And one more thing to note within this. So this was a Google spreadsheet. So the results are not anonymized within the end user community. So every person there can see what every other company is doing. So here were the results. This is actually a super wide spreadsheet. So this kind of goes along the top row and then keeps extending to the right. 33 companies put their information in. I've blacked out the names of those here. But as you can see, I've also color-coded these. So adopt is green, trial is blue, yellow is assess, and then red is hold. So this is the actual results that the end users put for themselves. So once this was all in, my next step was to look horizontally across these and look at the results that came for each project. And for each one, I asked myself, how many adopts are there? Are there some that have more holds, which means they're probably not being actively used so much? And for me to sort those and then to sort of draw a line about where I thought they should end up. So this is what I did here. You can see the results. So I've sorted them so all the adopts are towards the left for easier viewing. And I decided as the editor for this particular radar that Flux and Helm seemed to have a good number of companies who said they adopt it. A couple who said they put it on hold for Helm, but, broadly positive consensus. And then in the next set for trial, I put in Circle CI, GitLab, and Customize. So these ones had quite a few companies who say they adopt it, but not as many as the ones up here. Or, there were a few holds here that perhaps didn't outweigh as many of the adopt ones. And then basically everything else went into assess. So some of these, just as you were saying, they're too new. There maybe isn't enough information to decide one way or another. Jenkins is a standout because this is the super long, super wide row here. Of course, lots of people have used and have heard of Jenkins, but more than 50% of these votes that came in for hold. So again, I felt like it wasn't enough to say this was broadly positive. I guess Spinnaker is also pretty widely known, but nobody said that they were adopting Spinnaker. So this is roughly where they landed for me. And as I mentioned before, that this is where a bit of that subjectivity comes in. So certainly if someone else was building this, they might decide to put, one item into a different bucket. That's up to everybody's judgment.
So the way you came up with the subjectivity for it is like you basically did a count, right? According to assessed, adopt, hold. And then that's how you then categorized it by essentially the count that you saw.
So it was primarily on the count, but there were, as I said, like some things that are just subjective about this. So, you could have easily said like, some people might ask like, maybe you should put Jenkins in this one because it's a bit higher. There's no, like it's primarily on the count, but as you can also see, like some people left comments about why they put it in this particular category. Maybe it was missing certain features, maybe it didn't support one of their styles, their use cases, or it didn't work well with the other tools that they were using in their own stack. So I took a little bit of that into account into deciding what I thought the final position should be.
How did you take into account the continuous delivery foundation? Jenkins is part of Jenkins, and Jenkins X are part of the continuous delivery foundation, as is Spinnaker.
The answer to that is that I didn't. So the questions or the options that were listed here came from the end users. So they themselves decided which ones they wanted to talk about or which ones they wanted to see what other people are using. So there was no indication of like where it's laid out in terms of the foundation. Similarly here, Flux and Helm are both CNCF projects, but this is not biased. Like that didn't go into deciding that they should go into the adopt buckets. I've actually had some vendors ask me afterwards, like, hey, can we be listed on this? Or, hey, like, we do much the same thing as X, so we should be on here as well. So I said, like, none of that has any input into this at all. The only input is what are the end users using. The last part of this is to write some themes about what I was seeing as the editor. So these could be things that could include things that you might expect to see on the radar but weren't present, for instance, or just anything that I thought was surprising or interesting. And I wanted to say this specifically, that a technology radar is the opinions of one set of companies at one point in time. So it is opinionated by design, it's subjective. The goal is as much to spark discussion as it is to, say what's out there. And in fact, I just found out today that one of the Bangalore Cloud Native meetups, Cloud Native Bangalore, have decided that they're going to take every technology radar as it comes out and host a 1-hour discussion group on it. And for them decide, talk about what things they see on each radar. So I think that's awesome. I think that's exactly the sort of discussion points that I wanted to bring out through this report.
That's excellent. That really pushes it out to the edge, doesn't it?
Exactly. And if people wanted to do this, I would say you don't have to stick to, what is on this technology radar as the important things. Go beyond it, talk about what things that you found surprising, that you thought you're using that aren't on there. Like that kind of discussion will really bring out the value of this more than just, here's a graphic that you can look at. So I was very pleased to hear that. Okay, so having talked about how it's actually built, so let me look at the actual version of this, the final version. So first of all, you can see this is actually only a half radar. So we cut out the bottom half of this. Again, this is just for readability, especially on mobile, just makes it easier to see. And then Flux and Helm, as we saw, ended up in Adopt, Circle CI, Customize, and GitLab in trial, And then all of the other options pretty much ended up in assess. And I think I also put this continuous delivery in June 2020. So this is specifically tied to a point in time. And looking back now, if I had wanted to add anything to this, I probably would have added a title down here or a bit of text saying the data is contributed by the CNCF end user community in May of 2020, just to make it really explicit that, this is not the opinion of the CNCF. It's not the opinion of the TOC, the Technical Oversight Committee. Instead, it's the opinion of the actual end users.
How many end users did you talk to?
So 33 companies submitted 177 data points.
And did they fill out a survey?
They just filled it out on that spreadsheet. So
so
it was just like a collective. Yeah. So that's, as I mentioned right at the very beginning, that everything within the end user community is open. So people talk to each other, they can tell each other what they're doing because it's in a closed group, but they can't talk about it publicly a lot of the time. So instead, this is fine because this is a anonymized version, but within the group, they could all see who exactly is using each of these projects.
And how many companies did you say are in the ecosystem overall?
In the end user community, there is 145. So 33 of those responded.
Okay. So 20+% then. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Almost 23%. So that, I'm not sure that's 23%, but it's 20, so it's somewhere between 20 and 25%. But so I expect you're feeling then, as this gets more visibility, you'll see more participation. That just makes sense to me.
Yeah, I think so. This was the very first time that I'd run it. I'd put it out there, not even knowing if anyone would be interested in it or anyone would understand the format of it. So, and as you know, surveys usually have incredibly low response rates, in the 1 to 2%. So I was actually really pleased even that 33 companies took the time to put their information into this. And as you said, over time, as we continue to grow this and get more visibility around it, I'm hoping that more and more companies will want to join the end user community and then get their opinions heard as well.
Awesome.
So let me now talk about the 3 themes that I saw in this. So one is that I was expecting companies to say, we just use this one continuous delivery option or solution and that's it. But in fact, a lot of the end users have tried many, many options and then adopted a couple of those, 2 to 4. And then some of the larger enterprise companies had even open sourced components of what they're doing. So you can go to GitHub to check out LunarWay's release manager, Box's Cube applier, or StackSet's controller from Zalando. I also found it interesting that none of the public cloud managed options were suggested by any of the end users, which could be a reflection of, maybe there's an actual preference for running continuous delivery solutions in-house, or maybe it's just that when those companies were choosing a few years ago, there weren't the right features, or you don't know, right? Because those options are not on there.
Oh, so they've been building their own tools.
Yeah, exactly. At least in this particular group of companies. And of course, this group is biased because, they're probably more on the forefront of cloud native. They're more eager to adopt cloud native. But I did think it was interesting that they'd all done it in-house. Nobody had suggested a cloud managed option.
That's interesting too. So no cloud managed options. Some people are making their own. And I know that Box open sourced Cube applier.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's right.
And are LunarWay and Zalando's offerings open source too?
Yeah, exactly. So all 3 of these are open source options. They tend not to be full CD options. They tend to be components of them that they've isolated and released openly.
Okay. Are there more companies besides these that have built their own tools?
I think these were the only ones that listed them. There were a handful of others. Let me see if I have the information here. Yeah, so I put a row in here for some kind of in-house tool, leaving it very broad about what they meant. So as you can see, there's actually quite a few who've built their own thing, and that's what they adopt. Right.
Okay. Interesting. And 10 options. So 10 options seems to be, that's up to the number of them. I mean, I must be as low as of just 2 or 3, depending on the size of the company and how much they can test. There must be kinds of questions you're starting to have about how are they choosing, what are their, how do they kind of test each option, blah, on and on and on and on.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, what are the criteria that you actually like? Right. Why did you settle on this or that tool? Again, this is the sort of thing that within the group discusses quite frequently and quite openly, but it's not easy to release that kind of discussion publicly because then it reveals information about the infrastructure, which, might need PR approval, for instance.
Right.
The second one is that Helm is not usually seen as a continuous delivery tool, right? It's the package manager for Kubernetes, but it was very widely adopted as a component within CD. And in fact, it ended up as one of the only 2 options within Adopt. So that was a little bit surprising to me.
Now, Helm is out of the Azure group, isn't it?
Back in the day, I think it was started by Deis, and then Deis got acquired by Microsoft.
And now they're part of the Azure group, right? Or they are. They're under Gabe Monroy.
I mean, some of the people, like Microsoft, some of the people for sure are, but Helm itself is fully within CNCF.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So we host everything like the trademark and the governance around it.
Exactly. Okay.
And then the third one, which is the one that I have been getting the most flack for by a mile, is why is Jenkins in assess? So in fact, I hear 2 options of this, right? I hear everybody uses Jenkins, so you should put Jenkins higher, or nobody uses Jenkins anymore. Why is it even on there? Get rid of it. So in fact, we saw this in that original data, right? We saw lots of people saying adopt and lots of people saying put it on hold. So I put it in assess to say there's clearly still a lot of users of Jenkins and the associated tools around it, like Jenkins X. But if you were choosing a new CD solution today, then look at Jenkins, but also look at some of the other tools that are built as cloud native first. So, for example, Flux supports GitOps, right? A GitOps workflow. So that means that if that's a priority for you, you should be looking there first. Makes sense?
The criticism? Yeah, where's the criticism been surfacing? On Twitter, in private conversations, and who are the people who are critiquing just generally? Who are these people? Are they end users? Are they, who are they?
They tend to be on, when I've previously given this presentation, the question that immediately pops up when I show this slide is, why is Jenkins here? I don't know if they're vendors or end users. My guess would be a mix. But yeah, I think this is by far the most controversial point on this particular radar.
Flux is a surprise.
Right, Flux. I think I had one company on Twitter say, this is amazing, and this has brought Flux right up to the top of our list of projects that we want to evaluate. And I think that's awesome. Like, the goal of this is to help people prioritize among the, 5 million things that are on the CNCF landscape. What are the things that you should be looking at first? So the fact that Flux is here has prompted companies to say, oh, Flux must be, it's relatively, well, I don't know about new, but it only entered CNCF, I think, this year or last year. So it's relatively new to CNCF, but has already seen pretty good adoption. Hopefully that all of that made sense to you, and you can understand sort of how to read this kind of radar. We'll be reusing this same format in the future for the quarterly versions of each of these technology radars. Just for reference, if you want to read more about it, Helm, Argo, and Flux are all CNCF projects. And you can also check out some of the case studies that CNCF has written and shared from Babylon and Intuit. And these ones are specifically about continuous delivery.
Could you give so Helm is as a package manager. Can you describe in 1 or 2 sentences Argo and Flux?
So I'm not going to pretend that I know these in detail, but right. Argo is a workflow manager. Mm-hmm. And I think Argo and Argo CD are slightly different. But if you ask me how, I'm going to be a bit cagey on this, but I would check that out. And then Flux is, what's the best way to describe it? I guess I would also describe it as a workflow manager. I think it takes a slightly different philosophical approach to Argo, but you can sort of use these, you kind of look at, these fall within the same category to me.
Okay.
That's my feeling. And Argo actually is from Intuit. So it actually comes from an end user company.
Wow, interesting.
So that's kind of interesting as well. Okay. Right. So what's the next steps for this? So I really want to make this more useful and more valuable to people. As I said, I've already heard, meetups saying we're holding discussion topics around this, and companies saying we're using this to prioritize what to look at. And I would love to keep iterating on this and making it better. So if you have opinions to it, then you can go to this link, which redirects to a GitHub issue where you can just put your thoughts, or you can email us privately at info@cncf.io and just tell us what you think. The next one will come out in September. And if you want to decide or help decide what the next topic should be, then you should go to, again, this same link, this GitHub issue. And I took this snapshot of it just today. So you can see people are starting to upvote things that they care about and they think should be on the next version of the radar. And so the next version of the radar is actually going to be different in another quite significant way, which is that for this first edition of the radar, I acted as the editor for it. So I decided what the use case would be, and I wrote the themes around it. So for future ones, I want the end user community to actually do that themselves, so that it's completely an end user driven technology radar. It will be what they consider interesting or important. So they'll look at these votes and pick something they think is interesting from it. They will contribute the data themselves, and then they will actually decide those final positions and write up the themes themselves. So I want to sort of pull myself a little bit further back from this and just say, this is 100% driven by the end user community.
As a publisher, I'm curious, how do you plan to publish this information? Will it be in blog posts? Will it be in reports? How will you be presenting it through you and the end users?
So again, for the first one, we kept it fairly minimal. So it's just a blog post, and maybe the next one or two will be also just blog posts. But somebody asked me, hey, I really want an interactive version of this. I don't just want to send someone a graphic. I want to be able to link to the individual points and see the data for each point behind it. So one of my projects right now that I'm working on is building out this interactive version. So it would be like a portal where, you could go and actually just explore this radar and past radars once we have a couple of them.
Cool.
And again, the first version of this was very much like, we'll put it as a blog post and we'll just put it out there and see what the response will be. And the response to it has been so overwhelmingly positive that we're definitely investing heavily into making this, more usable, more valuable, and just help people really see this as a community-driven resource that they can use. And then the last part of this is that we actually want people to come and join the end user community as well. So if you are a company who is adopting cloud native and you want to find out like who is using which projects, what were their comments, what their email addresses are, and get in touch with them, then we can do that within this closed end user community. And then you can contribute as well to future versions of the radar and help edit the future versions as well. So you can email me if you're interested. You can go to this link and find out more. Similarly, if you are a vendor and you're thinking, hey, how do we contribute to this? I'd say get your end users to join the CNCF end user community, and then you'll also have a chance to see some of your products maybe represented on future radars. And that is it. So you can go to this link to get this slides as well, or you can email me at chung@linuxfoundation.org. So I hope that's been interesting and useful for you.
This is really cool. This is just what people need. It's helpful. It helps explain the landscape. It helps people better understand what is actually being used. I think those end users are going to be really critical to fully explain kind of how they use their technologies and how they're deploying them. We are the CNCF is a sponsor of the New Stack, and we are doing an end user series, with you. And I'm looking forward to talking to more of these companies. So I'll be looking forward to talking to them. And this is a real focus for us at the New Stack on the end users. So this is really fantastic what you've done. And look forward to following it and keep tracking it and seeing how this progresses. Nice work.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm really glad to hear that. And I also think that the end users are this huge untapped resource, but they really hold the key to what technology is coming up and what's really getting usage. So the more that we can do to highlight their stories and highlight what they're talking about and the challenges they face, I think the better for everybody in the whole ecosystem. So vendors, projects, and end users.
Oh, great.
Yeah, it's been fun. Thank you for having me to discuss this.
Cheryl Hung, live from London, England, in her coffee shop at home. Love the background.
I gotta admit, this kitchen is very hipster,
very
coffee shop,
hipster,
right?
Very hipster, very nice. And I'm from Portland, Oregon. Alex Williams here with the New Stack. Thanks, Cheryl. Thanks to CNCF. We look forward to keeping in touch about the Technology Radar.
Thank you, Alex.
Listen to more episodes of the New Stack Makers at thenewstack.io/podcast. Please rate and review us on iTunes, like us on YouTube, and follow us on SoundCloud. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.